Good morning, everyone. We were going to try to have Reverend Hershey or Brother Hershey have this talk as part of this series on political challenges for people of faith. And I tried to get you to squeeze your talk into that direction, but he was not going to buy it. And so we were, rather than struggle with trying to put a square peg into a round hole, I think he's going to give us an invigorating talk about how the presbytery is working to extend the idea of the Church 3.0. He is both a reverend and a brother, and I asked him on the way up here what the difference might be. The reverend, of course, he is ordained in the Presbyterian Church, and he served Presbyterian churches. But he also identifies himself as a monk, and that's why the title that he's chosen to share with us would be Brother Kevin Hershey. And before I go formally introduce him, I want to remind us that our forums are meant to be presentations that we offer to the DUPC congregation, but also to the staff and the general public that raise awareness of how our personal spirituality connects to issues of social justice. So it is a both and I'm sure that anything that we discuss will, I think, help inform whatever social justice initiatives we have. As you know, the next 3 weeks will be much more, I think the titles at least will be perhaps more secular. David Cay Johnston, what does federal spending say about our hearts? Then October 20th, David Cay Johnston, A Simpler Tax Code, Who Bears the Burden of Federal Spending? And then October 27th, Assemblyman Howard Bronson talking about moral and spiritual issues of this 2024 election. And I was actually hoping that Reverend Phil on November 3rd would actually be able to speak, be able to bring in the secular, political, and spiritual as well. But without further ado, Brother Kevin Hershey is a minister. He pastors Union Presbyterian Church and the new 1001 New Worship. Is that a new group?
No, we're about 9.5 years.
Okay. The Companions on the Way. He leads retreats and is a spiritual director. His particular interests in ministry are in Christian contemplation, spiritual formation, and exploring the intersection between the present-day church and culture. Brother Hershey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me with you this morning, and it was neat to see a number of familiar faces as I came in, faces that I've worked with all along the way. So it's really good to see everybody, and thank you for having me here this morning. And yes, David tried hard to get me to fit into that. So thank you for letting me break into the middle of your longer series with something different. I resisted that. We are now beyond resistance, and we are here today. And that's a topic I can speak on, but what Reverend Davis really asked me, I think, to come forward this morning to do the pulpit exchange and to do the forum was around the focus that I have had for my ministry since it began, really is that intersection between modern church or contemporary church and contemporary culture. Where do we intersect? Where do we meet? Where do we miss? Where are we totally unaware of each other? How does God bring all of those things together? And because, as you'll hear in a little bit, I'm one of the people who began a new committee in the life of the presbytery called the New Faith Communities Advocacy Working Group, specifically for helping new faith communities to form and be sustained. And a question around what does that mean for our individual churches in terms of supporting 3.0 church as we go. I've worked pretty extensively with Beyond Resistance and with John Dorhauer's work, talked with him a number of times, and I know you all have too. So because you have done the work you've done, I don't want us to belabor a lot of that book and redo too much of what you've already worked so hard on. There are a few foundational principles that I will lift up here as we begin, just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page. And then we'll talk a little bit about what does it mean to take some of that for Downtown United and actually put hands to it. if you would choose to do that for yourselves. And then what does it mean for Downtown United or other congregations to have an opportunity to support Church 3.0 moving forward? So that's the place that I would like to, oh, and I will say, I know you usually go till about 11:15. I'm also leading worship this morning. And so I'm going to try to keep us to around 10:30, so I have time, since I haven't been here before, to go over some things with the liturgist and with others to make sure that I don't mess up too badly. So so we'll try to keep to around that time. So that very first thing I've already used the language, but I want to make sure that we're together on that, is Church 2.0, Church 3.0. That is Reverend Dorhauer's language that he uses to basically describe the way that church tends to exist today and really kind of has for centuries is 2.0. The emerging church that is functioning a little bit differently, whatever God is doing with that we are seeing inklings of and that God will ultimately be shifting us towards, is 3.0. And Dorhauer makes it very clear 2.0 is not going away, but 2.0 will be minimized. And 3.0 will emerge as sort of the dominant form of church in the future. What does that mean? What does it look like? What might God be doing with that? That's where we are right now in trying to figure all of that out, step by step, little by little. I remind my church all the time that God has a tendency to show one step. And if you take it, we'll show the next step. And we tend to be those that like to see the whole picture before we take the first step. And God tends to go, too bad. You're with me or you're not. So when you're ready to take the first step, I'll show you the next one. And while you're waiting to see them all, I'm going to keep going. Catch up when you're ready. Right? Not easy, not comfortable, but there it is. So Dorhauer also talks about what it means to sort of make that transition. And the language he uses in his book is to maintain the message while changing the medium. Okay, this notion that all of this is happening is not just Dorhauer. You may have read Phyllis Tickle in her notion of the emergent church, right, and the new reformations that are happening. Richard Rohr talks about this. Brian McLaren talks about this. Barbara Holmes talks about this. The people who are looking at this are generally in agreement that this is in the works, but are also in agreement with the notion that our goal is to leave the message while changing the medium. You're going to hear more about that in my sermon later on. But that essentially what that is trying to figure out what is the foundational stuff, the message of love, of peace, of gracious accountability, of mercy, of joy. That doesn't change from era to era, generation to generation, right? Reformation to reformation, that stays the same. But the medium, how it looks, how we help connect the culture to it, that look changes. And if we are to remain relevant, that's a word you'll hear me use a lot. If we are to remain relevant to the culture, we have to figure out how to change that medium. That's what all of those folks that I mentioned sort of really lift up. And to be very clear, we believe that God is always relevant to the culture. Big C church is always relevant to the culture. An individual congregation's relevancy to the culture will depend on how well they are or are not able to change that medium. Because if our goal as a church really is to help the culture connect with God, connect with their own spirits and the spirits of neighbor, right? Sound familiar? God, neighbor, and self. Then we have to be able to change the medium in which it happens to match the way in which they can receive that, or our ability to be relevant in doing that work with them is going to sort of disappear. And so they all lift up that notion. Constant message, changing medium. And Dorhauer lists, you may remember in the book, some specific ways in which the new culture, the postmodern, or if you were at his presentation, he now believes we're actually beyond the postmodern, perhaps to the next one. That's how fast things are moving these days. But there are certain characteristics of the postmodern culture that that medium, may have to adjust around. He talks about things like the fact that the postmodern culture no longer believes in the notion of absolute truth. Well, for an institution that is based on the idea of trying to figure out God's truth and share it with the world, what do we do with that? There's a foundation there, right? There's the message, but there's also the way it gets conveyed, right? How does the current culture need to hear that differently? He talks about the idea that in the postmodern culture, they learn differently. Well, in a system that has functioned largely the same way, in almost any mainline Protestant church that you walk into, you're going to see real similar stuff. If that is no longer the way in which the dominant culture learns best, what are we going to do about that? We don't want to change the message, but there's a medium shift to be had. Talks about the idea that that the postmodern culture tends to not trust organized institutions, of which the church is one. Perhaps some of that trust was broken, I wonder, by that first piece, right? That you have a culture that says we don't believe in absolute trust, and an organization saying, but we have it, and here it is, we'll give it to you, and then you have to do it, right? And the culture begins to say, well, then our trust is broken, right? What kinds of medium would need to change? What kinds of ways in which we get across the things that are the message we have to share from God would need to change in order to regain and heal with some of that trust in a new culture? All of these things that we talk about like that, talk about the how of the situation. How do we need to change? How do things need to look differently? How might we need to adapt? How is the world perceiving things? Okay. And how is an important question, and we have to get to it. There's an author, and the book title I remember, but the author escapes me, but maybe you have read the work, is Start with Why. Talks about golden circles, if that rings a bell to anybody. Start with why. And what the author talks about is that culturally, we are sort of trained to jump in with both feet and begin fixing stuff, right? So how does this need to look? How does that need to look? How does that need to look? And the author says, you need to start with the foundational understanding of why are you doing this in the first place? Why do you exist in the first place? And it reminded me that at his presentation, if anybody was there, Reverend Dorhauer said, if you take one thing away from my book or my presentation, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I really think it's faithful to what he was talking about, is if you take one thing away from my book or my presentation, I hope it's this, that for your church to be vital, you must be able to commonly articulate, that is, all of the active participants, members or regular attendees, right? Because membership is changing, right? All of the active participants be able to hold a common articulation of your specific and unique purpose for God. Now, he uses, if you remember the book, he uses the word mission. I changed that to purpose, and the reason that I do that is because he's not talking in the book about mission in terms of service-oriented mission. And in the church, we use it that way so often, I think we can forget that it's broader than that. Service mission can be your purpose. It can be one part of your purpose. That can still be true. But to avoid the notion that that's the only purpose that a church could have, I use that term purpose instead, just to avoid that ambiguity. But he says, if you want to take one thing away, let it be that. The common articulation of your unique and specific purpose for God. And so we can begin to ask that question, what is the unique purpose of a church? What is Downtown United's unique, specific purpose for God? Why do you exist? Now, why is it so important to ask that? Well, because so often we're not able to articulate that narrowly. We have a broader interpretation of it. Let me give you an example. So I've been working with my own congregation, Union Presbyterian Church in Scottsville. I've been working with another congregation that has hired me to come in because I've started to develop a program around putting actual concrete hands to Dorhauer's concepts. He has some ideas in the back, but that's always a sticking place, right? We finish a book study, we finish work with a consultant, we've got a great picture and some great conceptual suggestions, but what do we actually do with it? So I began by taking my congregation's mission statement. And I like their mission statement. It's one of the best mission statements I've actually seen from a church. And I said, so if we took this mission statement 2 doors down to the Episcopal Church that we link with for so many things, and we said, could this apply to you too? Do you think they would, what do you think they would say? I said, we think they'd say, yep, this could be our mission statement too. I said, what if you took it to the Catholic Church, a couple doors down on the other side? And they said, yeah, it probably would apply to them. I said, what about the Pentecostal church next door? They said, probably. How about the Baptist church? Probably. How about the Mormons? Maybe. Quite possibly. Right? Because what did it speak of? It spoke of, the mission statement was around things like, we're to love each other and love God and be loved by God and serve one another, help each other, be a community inside the church, and serve those in need outside of the church, right? So it can apply to everybody. Now, there's 2 things that happen when that's true. One of them is we have done a beautiful job of articulating some of the foundational stuff of our faith that binds us all together as Christian people, right? We have those statements that are so universal that we can all come together around them. And at the same time, what we don't have is anything that tells people who we are uniquely, who this congregation is in doing that for the larger world. And 2 problems kind of arise out of that. One of them is that internally, we may all be there for a totally different reason. This person wants to do this, and this person wants to do that, and this person is doing that. Now, on the one hand, that gives great freedom for our personal expressions of faith. But on the other hand, what we can ask is, how deeply connected is a community that gets together to all do something different? Or gets together, but to all do something on their own? And where is the piece of it that says, this is who we are as a united body, right? So internally, we may be a community, but we may feel kind of distant because we're not all there for the same purpose. Externally, it has complications too. How many of you have heard of church shopping? Have you ever gone church shop? I've gone church shopping, right? What's church shopping? I go to this church and see what it's like. Then I go to this church and see what it's like. Then I go to this church and see what it's like. And I began to wonder, why couldn't you just look at the church's webpage, look at their mission statement, and decide, at least for a few of them, that it's going to fit or not fit right away? Well, because everybody's mission statement says the same thing. We're going to love Jesus. God's going to love us. We're going to serve the people in need and support one another internally. That doesn't help if what you're trying to do is discern, is this a community that I belong or not? I mean, yes, we all belong, but as Reverend Nadia Bolter-Weber says, all are welcome, not all will fit. She doesn't mean physically, right? I mean, that may be true, but she doesn't mean physically. What she means is, if you have done a good job of articulating your unique and specific mission, everybody's welcome to give it a shot, but it may or may not be what you are wanting to do for your own spirit, and that's okay. So I lifted up the what we call a statement of identity from Companions on the Way. And again, I'm paraphrasing just a teeny bit here, but what our statement of identity at Companions on the Way says is, we are a new monastic community specifically focused on learning relational skill from Jesus to spread the love of the Christ as we integrate it into our everyday living. Okay. And so I handed that to Union Presbyterian and I said, could this be our mission statement here at Union Presbyterian? And they said, no. And I said, why not? And they said, well, first of all, we're not new monastic. I said, right. I said, why else not? They said, well, we talk about relationships and what Jesus does with relationships. I'm heavy on that in most of my sermons, is relational stuff. But it's not our primary or exclusive focus. We don't bounce everything off of whether or not we are doing relational skill building as our means of loving the world. I said, right. So somebody could look at what was happening at Companions on the Way and very quickly either decide that is not for me, or yes, that is a place where my faith might belong. And the people who are coming into that community are there because they want to be part of that. Now, there's lots of freedom of expression for exactly how you do that once you are part of the community, but that is our specific goal. And so the people who come are all working on the same thing. We can ask common questions and support common needs because we have the same understanding for why we're there in the first place. And so we can begin to see a little bit, I think, that power that Dorhauer is talking about in saying vitality begins at that place of being able to understand your purpose, specifically, uniquely, universally within the life of that body. Why do you exist for God? And so, as a concrete starting place for Downtown United, for any congregation, what I hear him saying and what I have come to believe and to lead churches into is if you want a great concrete starting place for asking yourself, how do we get from where we are to a step forward, right? I talked with some people beforehand, said we're wondering, right? We're in that 2-point range, right? What does it look like to be 0.1 more? Or what does it look like to simply be a more vital congregation? Right? If you start with this, is to begin with this concrete step, to begin to ask yourselves as individuals and a congregation, what is our purpose? Why do we exist for God? Uniquely, specifically, why do we exist? And you can start with big C stuff. Well, why does the church exist? And you can start with that, but it's got to get to that place of being concrete. Because what it does is it allows the community to tighten together around a common sense of purpose for God. So we aren't just a disparate community that happens to be together, but doing lots of different things. We are a deep community that gathers together and understands why and what we're doing for God. And if that doesn't fit for somebody else, that's okay. That's not something to be lamented, right? We are not intended to be the entire body of Christ. We're intended to be one part of the body of Christ. So let's claim our part and allow the church down the road to be the different part. And if that's the part that serves, we have to have the flexibility to say, they may serve you really well. You're welcome to be here, but whether or not you fit is up to you. They may serve you really well. You might fit there, right? We're still supporting the larger body of Christ. And that's the primary goal, right? Not to get people here that don't fit, but to get people connected with God, right? Foundational message stuff. So there's a concrete step that Downtown United or any congregation could take to begin to work towards being that more vital congregation, maybe even taking steps towards how do you build the rest on that deeper foundation. You will hear more in my sermon again about foundations and building on them, message versus medium. There's another piece to this that Dorhauer lifts up that can be a little bit hard for us to hear as we hear all these changes. He talks, you may remember in the book, about how he was working with a congregation. And at the end of their time, they came and they said, so how do we become a 3.0 church? And he said, well, you don't. It is virtually impossible for a 2.0 church to become a 3.0 church. With God, all things are possible. So we cannot say it is impossible. But in my experience, and it sounds like in Reverend Dorhauer's too, it is virtually impossible for a congregation to become, for a 2.0 congregation to become a 3.0 church. You can move towards it, but to actually get there, and we can talk, if people have more questions later, we can talk more in detail about why that is, but it is. However, that same group later on contacted him and said, well, then how can we support the 3.0 church? And he said, that I can teach you. And they began to work together on how to support the 3.0 church. Now, I'll give you some concrete examples again. And the way that I'll do that for today is to let you know a little bit more about this new committee that has started within the life of the presbytery. Myself, along with Reverend Deb Swift and C.P. Whitney Scoville, got together and we asked this question. We said, so part of the call of the presbytery, it's in the Book of Order, part of the call of a presbytery is to begin new faith communities. We have expressions of that at the national level. It's called the 1001 New Worshiping Community Initiative. All three of our communities are that. We have it at the synod level. It's called the Emerging Gospel Communities. Companions on the Way is also that. But at the presbytery level, well, we offer great encouragement for our new worshiping communities, which is not a light thing. I will tell you, because there are many presbyteries out there, and I work with other pastors of new faith communities who are in those presbyteries that just out of hand reject the notion of these new faith communities forming. Ours is very encouraging and supportive, but we're not particularly proactive. We don't have any way to proactively help people begin new faith communities, or at least we didn't used to, right? So we were supportive if they got started, but we said, but part of our call is to do that. And we put lots of time and energy into helping our existing 2.0 congregations survive as long as they can, maybe get some new vitality and grieve the losses when it's time to grieve. But we don't put any proactive energy into beginning new ones. Why not? And so we said, what if we begin to do that? And so we said, well, what if we start a new working group? So the new working group that is formed is called the New Faith Communities Advocacy Working Group, the NFCA. That is our new working group, and our primary purpose is just that, to help new faith communities begin and to support ones after they begin to exist. And some of the ways in which we do that we are a sort of a repository. It's our job to keep up with how all of the new faith community initiatives that are out there work. So if you're going to go through 1001, what does that look like? What's the process? How do you take the inkling, the spark of an idea? Because that's how the three of us all started. We had a spark of an idea and said, I don't know where to put this because this doesn't fit anywhere that I know of. And eventually, each of us had to go through our own process of figuring out, well, 1001 is out there, Emerging Gospels is out there, right? What if we made a place that people can come and just ask those questions? What did you do? How does it work? What are some options you're aware of, right? So it's our job to stay informed about what it looks like to go through each of those processes, to help our presbytery create through this body the process for doing it at the presbytery level. What do all those things look like? So it's a place for knowledge gathering. It's a place for community. That once you have done this or you're thinking to do it, there's radically different questions that the 3.0 church asks, radically different needs, radically different concerns than what the 2.0 church has. Can we make a community where people can talk about those things? Because there's not another place to talk about them, or there aren't many other places to talk about them. So we're developing communications around it, and just communications around people that are interested. You'll hear coming up that we did sort of an open house in a upstairs of a pizza parlor. And we had such a great turnout that we said, well, even people who don't want to be on this working group seem to want to talk about it. What if we create an open opportunity for the people who are interested in it to come whenever they want and keep the conversation going? So we're trying to link people in community and conversation for support. There is a financial piece. There's always a financial piece, right? So we are asking questions around things like, there's funding at the national level. There's funding at the synod level. If somebody wanted to begin something, how would the presbytery currently offer financial support for the starting of a new faith community like we're called to do in the Book of Order? We don't have a way right now. So part of what this group is going to be working on is how do we identify those possibilities for how to make that happen? One of the pieces that has been big for us, originally we were going to be the New Faith Communities Working Group. And that changed to be the New Faith Communities Advocacy Working Group. Because in addition to all of this, one of the things that got lifted up as we were beginning this notion was how much advocacy these groups tend to need. When we first began at Companions on the Way, I would get questions like somebody came to me and they said, okay, so somebody is not attracted to the traditional church. So they like your thing, you get them in, you build some trust, and then you send them to the real church, right? That's how it works. And we said, no, no, this is their valid place of community. Or we talked about all the different kinds of communities that are out there. And somebody would say, so you mean people are doing that instead of church? We said, no, people are doing that as church. This is their church. So just being able to sort of elevate things to the point where these new faith communities, which are part of 3.0, the direction that God seems to be leading, they're not the end all be all. We believe that God will form it far beyond what these communities are, but we're a step along the way, maybe a leap along the way, right? But that they count and that they matter. And so we've begun to do things like, maybe you didn't know this, maybe you did. Even before this community got started, the Presbytery voted to allow new faith communities to have a commissioner go to Presbytery with voice and vote, so that these communities that are 3.0 communities can begin to help the Presbytery shape their language and their understanding of these kinds of communities. Because the Presbytery's ultimate job is to serve the churches. Well, if you've got all 2.0 churches, or mostly 2.0 churches, you're going to be a mostly 2.0 Presbytery, which means you're not thinking 3.0. So these people can help with that conversation. When the working group got formed, in its formation, part of what happened was the permission to have this body be the permission-giving body for new faith communities to celebrate communion or to hold a baptism, and that the presbytery would hold the baptismal certificate. Part of that was because before this, you had a sponsoring congregation that oversaw the new faith community, and they were the ones to give permission. It kept chartered churches up here and new faith communities down here. This helps bring them on par, right? Make them matter. There are other questions. We happen in our presbytery, every one of us who's leading a new faith community also is pastoring a 2.0 congregation. That's not the way it is for a lot of them. And so what would we do with a pastor who was just pastoring a new faith community? Could they be considered a validated ministry? We're going to be asking some of these questions, right? These are advocacy questions, that this stuff matters. And so what can Downtown United do to support Church 3.0? What could any church in our presbytery do? Well, just those things. Join one of those open houses and become part of the conversation. Learn about the new faith communities that are in the presbytery and beyond. Visit one sometime. Most of them aren't on Sunday mornings. So there's something right there, right? See what they're about. Check them out. Ask questions of the people who are pastoring them about them, or the participants in them. They can speak to them just as well as we can. Wonder about them together. Find those people in your congregation or your personal life that you hear having a spark of the Spirit, I call it, right? I've got this call to do something and I don't know what to do with it. Could it be a call to work with a new faith community, to begin a new faith community, right? Lift them up, encourage them. Money? Yeah. Donate funding, donate stuff to help pass on the resources that are needed to 3.0. And above all, and I know that this is something that Downtown United is really good at and has on your hearts in all kinds of ways, advocacy. When you hear people talking about the communities in ways that tend to minimize or lessen what they are for God, speak into that, right? Speak words that put those things on par and help elevate. For me, what all of this is a reminder that says God is okay. The Big C Church is okay. Our individual congregations are changing, and that can be painful and difficult. We can own that and we can talk about it. And ultimately, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all shall be well because God has it. Our job is to figure out what we can do where we are the best that we can. What can you do as Downtown United to begin working toward your own vitality? Figuring out your purpose. What can you do as Downtown United to support whatever God is doing in the future of the church? Support Church 3.0 along the way. And know that God has it all in loving, caring hands. Always has, and always will. So that is my presentation for you this morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. And what questions do you have? What thoughts do you have? What dialogue do you want to have with each other? What you got?
Thank you, Kevin. I think that speaking for myself, I'm, excited, but also anxious because not that I'm a loyal Presbyterian, but this almost seems to be a way to evolve Presbyterianism away from Presbyterianism, which is a very structured, hierarchical system based on shared creedal beliefs. So this is there a Presbyterian Church 3.0?
There are 3 of them in our presbytery. There's Companions on the Way.
Well, they nominally, are they, is the Presbyterian Church able to envision a structure that is 3.0?
There's a great question, and we're going to find out together. Part of it is we don't know the answer to that, and that depends on the capacity of individual churches, individual disciples, and therefore presbyteries to answer some of these questions. What is the changing medium? Can you change it? Can you not? If we're not able to, then we've shown no, we can't. And that will have consequences. If we show that we are able to, that will also have consequences. But we will live into it or not together, and God will do what God will with it together. One step, we know one step, maybe. We get an inkling of one step. Sometimes we're just stepping into the darkness, right? And going, okay, I think, right, there it is. Yeah.
So this is going to be a very pushy question.
Yeah.
Okay. I love the idea of new faith communities, you know, just kind of being free and discovering and, you know, connecting with spirit. But the thing is that I'm also on the finance committee here, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's keeping the lights on in this building, okay? And these faith communities, in my opinion, are taking it for granted that these buildings exist and that they can come in, and we rent to like Quakers and, you know, all these various things. We'll rent to a new faith community, but when are those, I'm sorry, this is a really pushy question,
that's all right.
okay? When are those new faith communities going to start, you know, wake up to that and take responsibility for it? You know, it's all fine to have, you know, wonderful, you know, wonderful spiritual ideas, but they're on our coattails. That's a problem, in
So,
my opinion.
yeah. So, so there's a question, right? That I hear in that is, how independent are they? How are they doing their own thing? So I'll give you some examples. For Back to Center, which is South Presbyterian connected, new faith community, and for Companions on the Way, we both have physical physical spaces that we are in. Neither of them are a church building. In fact, we won't go to a church building. We had that offered to us as a donation. We took it for a few months and said, but our whole point is this is for people who would never want to step into one of these spaces. So we won't take them. But what we do with each of those communities is we find something to give back. So Back to Center is in a nursing home. And what they do is they lead the worship that everybody who is there is able to go to. And much of their makeup has become people from that community who can no longer leave their residence and now are worshiping there. At Companions on the Way, we meet at the Mercy Spirituality Center. They donate the space to us, but it's in exchange for the fact that we lead retreats for them. We connect with them around different programs that they are doing to sort of advocate and lift up their programs. So what we have is a much more communal connection than exclusively financial, right? We are connecting with them in community. I know the director knows me. I have a key to the place. We love and care about each other. We know when something is going on and we pray for each other. It is a much more communal feel than just landlord-tenant. And so when we build those, we wind up being able to help one another with that. Now, Pray and Play became a different thing. What Ogden Presbyterian Church said to CP Scoville was, we'd like to have you here, but you have this other thing that you're doing and we want you full time. We believe so strongly in 3.0 that what we would like to do is say that 10 hours, you know, a quarter of your time goes to leading that. We'll pay you, but you lead that. Because we believe so strongly in what you're doing there and what 3.0 is doing there, that becomes our financial mission, is to support that going on in the life of the church. A church can choose to do that. But every one of these communities has also said, if anybody was to stop that entirely, we'd be fine. If Mercy said, sorry, we're closing our doors, we'd go, okay, we'll go somewhere else. We'll go to a house. We've worshiped in the park before because it's free. We don't have, that's back to those questions that the communities are asking. Every one of these has definitively said, we never want to own space, ever. Because it gives us the flexibility to go where God is leading us instead of to be stuck in a single space. Companions on the way, in our first 6 years, no, in our first 8 years, moved 6 different places. And part of that was to say, we are not where we are who we are. We are the community. It doesn't matter where we do it, right? So we'll go here and be the community. We'll go there and be the community. We can be the community wherever we go. We're not bound to a location. We're not bound to a space. We love Mercy and we've spent our most time there. But that's not a worry of ours or an anxiety. But it's also not a burden that we're putting on other people to say, you have to support us financially. We have found our ways to say, this is how we will do this with our finances. And if you give something to us, we can find a way to give back to you that is not financial. But if we even lose that, we're okay. Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. I would like to know if these faith communities are non-denominational, or are they just Presbyterian? If they're Presbyterian, what do they owe the Presbytery of Genesee Valley?
Yes. So great question. We are each Presbyterian because in the 1001 movement and in the Emerging Gospels community movement, part of what you have to do is speak into to get approved for that is to speak into how are you a Reformed church within the Presbyterian tradition, and we have to be linked to a Presbyterian church. So we still have a sponsoring congregation. That just means that they sign off that they are walking alongside us. It doesn't necessarily mean financial. Ours has not been financial at all. It's just been a walking alongside with an existing congregation. The Presbytery could do that too. Part of the things that we owe the Presbytery, the same things that everybody else owes the Presbytery, every congregation. When you hire a pastor, a certain percentage of their time must go to serving the needs of the congregation. We do that too. So I serve on this committee, right? On this working group. We have a commissioner who goes to the Presbytery meetings. Part of what we have to give to the Presbytery is, again, an experiential knowledge of Church 3.0. Right, that they don't have other places. So that is one of the big gifts. One of the former New Faith communities was the Seekers community, headed by Reverend Bill Hockey. And whenever the Presbytery would ask, what can we do to support you? He would answer, and then he would say, and what can we do to support you? Right? Which is a sort of an odd question to ask back. And I began years later to understand, that's because there is so much that there is to potentially share from the community back. It's not just money. It's not just, per capita and stuff, right? It is an experiential knowledge of what it looks like to walk with Church 3.0 for those who are interested in hearing about that. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Yeah, we're right at about 10:30. Is there a burning question that anybody else has? Like we could do one more. Yes.
Just tactical or, where would it be on the Presbytery website where we can find the meetings that you have for people who want to learn more about this and go to, and also where the individual congregations are that are forming new churches?
Yes. So the working group itself is new enough. I'm not sure. I've got to actually double check with Lisa Bennett to see if we're on the web page. The gatherings themselves, like the official meetings, if you want to participate in one, just let me know and I can add you to a list. The conversational ones that are more like the open house, we're currently setting dates and locations for people that just like to be part of the conversation, not necessarily serve on the working group. And so those will all be released probably also in the e-news that goes out. We'll make sure that folks are knowing about, especially that the conversational
The
stuff.
Presbytery e-news?
Yes, the Presbytery e-news. And then in terms of the individual communities, I've got to double check where we're at with those on the Presbytery webpage. That's a great question. I know for us, our webpage a year ago or so now, went down due to an update in the platform. And so I've had to rebuild the entire web page. And so I'm mid-process. I've got 2 more pages to create on it and then it can go live. We'll be ready for it. But
And if in doubt, we could email you and
email me, I can connect
sure
it to
that
the other
you'd love that.
pastors. Or as I said, Reverend Deb Swift is one
yeah.
for Back to Center, and CP Whitney Scoville is the pastor for Pray and Play. Yeah, which is specifically designed for families with young children to be able to worship as a family in ways that meet the needs of both the parents and the child. Instead of kid goes into the nursery, parents go into the sanctuary. How do we do it together and keep them together? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me have this time with you. I'll see most of you, I hope, in a few minutes.
Reiterate next week.
So that's it for this week. Next week, as we all know, David K. Johnston will be here for the first of 2. And his topic will be, what does federal spending say about our hearts? Which it's going to be fascinating, just how he's going to tie in our economic, our political, our social, and our spiritual selves, right? It's and I hope that that's going to be well attended. As we also said, October 20th is talking about the simpler tax code. Who bears the burden of federal spending? Our hearts are where our money is, I suppose. And then Harry Bronson, October 27th, talking about moral and spiritual issues of this 2024 election. We have great hopes. We'll see what happens with those conversations. See you next week. Oh, bring your friend. I forgot what the first question was.